Hi everyone, welcome back. We've got a brand new story to share with you, so let's begin. I never thought my marriage would end the way it did. Looking back now, I can see all the signs I chose to ignore, all the red flags I convinced myself were just temporary storms we'd weather together. My wife and I had been married for what felt like a lifetime, though in reality it was just over 4 years. But those last 2 years were nothing short of exhausting. We fought constantly, argued about everything from finances to things that never made sense to say about, and somewhere along the way, we stopped being partners and became adversaries living under the same roof. The misunderstandings piled up like dirty dishes in the sink, each one adding to the growing resentment between us. I won't pretend I was perfect. I had my faults, my moments of stubbornness, my times when I should have listened more and talked less. But I was committed to making it work. Every fight, every slammed door, every night spent sleeping on opposite sides of the bed with an ocean of cold silence between us. I thought these were just phases that all marriages went through. I believed that if we just kept trying, kept pushing through, we'd eventually find our way back to each other. I never once considered that divorce was on the table. It wasn't even in my vocabulary when it came to us. So when she sat me down one Tuesday evening, her face set in that determined expression I'd come to know so well, and told me she wanted a divorce, my entire world collapsed. She said she wasn't happy. She said she needed to find herself. Those words felt like rehearsed lines from a movie, not something my wife of 4 years would actually speak to me. I was devastated, completely blindsided by her decision. I begged her to reconsider, to give us another chance, to try counseling, to do anything but throw away what we'd built together. But she was resolute, her mind already made up, her bags probably already mentally packed. I couldn't understand how she could walk away so easily, how she could flip a switch and decide that everything we'd been through meant nothing. Even as the divorce papers were filed and the legal process began grinding forward with its cold, impersonal machinery, I didn't give up. I kept trying to talk her out of it, sending her flowers to her office, writing her letters, explaining how we could fix things and be better. When she stopped answering my calls, I enlisted friends to talk to her, mutual acquaintances who might be able to get through to her in ways I couldn't. I even asked her mother to intervene, hoping that the family might carry some weight. But nothing worked. She was hell-bent on ending things, and with each rejected attempt at reconciliation, I felt a piece of myself crumble away. The divorce dragged on for what felt like forever. And I'm talking months that turned into this endless cycle of court dates, lawyer meetings, and paperwork that never seemed to stop coming. Every single appointment felt like I was watching someone hammer another nail into the coffin of everything we'd built together. I was barely functioning during this time, if I'm being frank with you. My mind was racing through every conversation we'd ever had, trying to figure out where it all went wrong. I was living in this thick fog of sadness and confusion, just existing from one day to the next without any real purpose or direction. Then, about 6 months into this nightmare of a divorce process, something happened that completely changed the game. Lisa reached out to me. Now, Lisa was my wife's best friend, and I mean best friend in the truest sense. She'd been a bridesmaid at our wedding, standing right there next to my wife as we exchanged vows. She'd been over to our house countless times for dinners, game nights, and just hanging out. I'd known her for years, and she'd always struck me as a genuinely good person. She'd never gotten married herself, which my wife used to comment on sometimes, but Lisa always seemed content with her life. So when she called me out of the blue to ask if we could meet for coffee because she had something important to tell me, I was surprised but agreed. We met at this small cafe downtown. I got there first and ordered a black coffee, then sat at a corner table waiting for her. When Lisa walked in, I could immediately tell something was wrong. She sat down across from me and spent the first few minutes just fidgeting with the paper cup sleeve. I waited, giving her time, because clearly whatever she wanted to tell me was difficult for her to say. Finally, after what felt like a while, she took a deep breath and just came out with it. She told me that my wife had been cheating on me. Not just recently, but for a while now. She said the affair had started even before my wife filed for divorce, which meant my wife had been sleeping with another man while still coming home to me every night, while we were still technically trying to work things out. She told me that my wife was currently living with this other man at this very moment, while our divorce was still being processed through the courts. I sat there staring at Lisa, trying to process what she just said, and my first instinct was complete denial. I told Lisa she had to be wrong, that she must have misunderstood something or gotten bad information from someone. I said that my wife, despite all our problems and all the fighting, wouldn't do something like that. She wasn't that kind of person. She wouldn't cheat. She wouldn't lie to my face for months while carrying on with someone else behind my back. But even as I was saying these things, defending a woman who'd already left me, Lisa just looked at me with these sad, knowing eyes. She insisted that what she was telling me was the truth, and the way she looked at me made me realize she wasn't making it up or exaggerating. She gave me specific details to show she wasn't making things up. She told me the man's name, some guy I'd never even heard of. She gave me the address where they were living together, an apartment complex on the other side of town. She even told me how long the affair had been going on. I started doing the math in my head and realized what that meant. Lisa looked genuinely upset as she told me all of this, as I could see that this conversation was complicated for her, too. She explained that she'd known about the affair for a while, but had been torn about whether to tell me. She said she'd argued with my wife about it multiple times, told her that what she was doing was wrong, and that she needed to either end the affair or be honest with me. But my wife had refused, and Lisa had finally reached a point where she couldn't stay silent anymore. She looked me straight in the eye and said that she'd never supported what my wife was doing, that she thought it was cruel and cowardly, and that I deserved to know the truth about what was really going on. She said she couldn't live with herself if she kept this secret any longer, knowing that I was out here fighting to save a marriage that my wife had already destroyed months ago. I didn't want to believe her. Every part of me wanted to think this was a misunderstanding or a mistake. But I also couldn't just ignore what she told me. That night, after I left the cafe and went home to my apartment, I couldn't stop thinking about what Lisa had said. I needed to know for sure. I opened up my laptop and started digging. I checked my wife's social media accounts, looking for any clues I might have missed before. I scrolled through her friends list and found the guy Lisa had mentioned. I looked at his profile, his photos, and my stomach turned when I saw pictures of him at places I recognized. I reached out to a couple of mutual friends to see if anyone else knew what was going on. Being desperate for the truth, I got in my car the next morning and drove to the address Lisa had given me. The apartment building was one of those newer complexes with a parking garage and a security gate. I parked across the street where I could see the visitor parking area and just sat there in my car scanning the cars and people passing by. Over the next few days, I couldn't help myself. I went back to that apartment building multiple times, parking in different spots, watching for clues. One evening, I got lucky and saw them together. My wife and this man were walking out of the building. They got into his car and drove off, and I just sat there feeling like my entire world had been built on lies. The divorce wasn't even finalized yet. We were still months away from the judge signing the papers that would officially end our marriage. And here she was, already living a completely different life with someone else. The betrayal I felt in that moment cut deeper than anything I'd ever experienced. It was worse than when she'd asked for the divorce, worse than all the months of fighting and arguing. She'd been lying to my face every single day before the divorce. She'd let me beg her to stay, let me embarrass myself trying to save our marriage, all while knowing she'd already moved on. That level of deception, that level of cruelty, was something I never thought she was capable of. That discovery changed absolutely everything for me. It was like someone had flipped a switch in my brain. The fog of grief and sadness that had been suffocating me for months suddenly lifted, and in its place was this cold, crystal clear determination. I was done. I stopped trying to win her back. I stopped calling her phone, hoping she'd answer. I stopped writing those pathetic letters explaining how we could fix things. I stopped asking our friends to talk to her on my behalf. All of that ended the moment I saw her with him. Instead, I called my lawyer first thing the next morning and told him I wanted to move forward with the divorce as quickly as legally possible. I told him to make sure every asset was divided correctly and that I was protected in the settlement. I wasn't going to be generous anymore. I wasn't going to make things easy for her. I was done being the fool who fought for someone who'd already checked out of the relationship months ago, who'd already been sharing her life and her bed with someone else while I was at home thinking we still had a chance. The divorce process continued to drag on, but now for different reasons. It wasn't me slowing things down anymore. Now it was just the legal system grinding along at its painfully slow pace. It took another 10 months after I found out about the affair for everything to be finalized. When you add it all up, the entire divorce took 16 months from start to finish. 16 months of showing up to court dates and sitting in uncomfortable chairs in hallways, waiting for our case to be called. It was exhausting, expensive, and emotionally draining, but at least now I knew the truth. At least now I wasn't fighting for a lie. Throughout this entire ordeal, Lisa remained a steady presence in my life. At first, I was cautious around her, wondering whether she had ulterior motives or was somehow playing both sides. But she proved herself time and again. She checked in on me regularly, brought me meals when she knew I wasn't eating properly, sat with me during the worst moments when the loneliness felt suffocating, and never once asked for anything in return. She was just there, solid and dependable in a world that had become unpredictable and painful. I appreciated her more than I could express, and slowly, I began to trust her presence in my life. After the divorce was finally finalized, I spent a year on my own, deliberately single and focused on rebuilding myself, and slowly began to feel like myself again. Lisa remained close throughout this time, but I was careful to maintain appropriate boundaries. She'd been my ex-wife's best friend, after all, and I didn't want to complicate an already complicated situation. But I couldn't deny that I looked forward to our conversations, and that she understood me in ways that felt effortless and natural. By the second year after my divorce, I began to realize that what I felt for Lisa had evolved beyond friendship. I found myself thinking about her constantly, noticing little things about her. I was falling for her, and the realization both excited and terrified me. I spent months wrestling with whether to act on these feelings, worried about what it might mean, how it might look to others, and whether she could feel the same way. Finally, I decided that life was too short to let fear dictate my choices. I'd already lost years to a marriage that was built on a foundation of lies. I wasn't going to lose more time by not being honest about what I wanted. I asked Lisa out on a proper date, making it clear that I was interested in her beyond just being a friend. My heart was pounding as I waited for her response, prepared for rejection and the potential loss of one of the most important people in my life. But she smiled and said yes. She admitted that she'd had feelings for me, too, but hadn't wanted to complicate my healing process or make me feel pressured. We agreed to take things slowly, to build something real and solid without rushing. Those early months of dating Lisa were some of the happiest of my life. Lisa and I had been dating for about 8 months when my ex-wife decided to make her surprise appearance. It was a Saturday evening, and I was at home, stretched out on my couch in sweatpants and an old t-shirt, just scrolling through my phone. Lisa had left about 20 minutes earlier to pick up Chinese food from our favorite spot across town. I was just enjoying the peace of having absolutely nothing urgent to do, waiting for my girlfriend to come back with dinner. When I heard the knock on the door, I didn't think much of it. I pushed myself off the couch, still looking at my phone as I walked to the door, and pulled it open without bothering to check the peephole. The moment I looked up and saw who was standing there, I felt like someone had dumped a bucket of ice water over my head. It was my ex-wife, standing on my doorstep. I hadn't seen her face to face since the day our divorce was finalized, which had been nearly 2 years ago at that point. We'd been done with each other, moved on with our separate lives, and I'd honestly thought I'd never have to deal with her again. Seeing her there in the flesh completely threw me off balance. Before I could even open my mouth to ask what she was doing there, she just walked right past me into my house without waiting for an invitation. It was exactly the kind of thing she used to do when we were married, like her wants and needs automatically took priority over everyone else's boundaries. She'd always been like that. I finally closed the door and turned around to see her standing in the middle of my living room, looking around like she was inspecting a place. I was trying to figure out what the hell was happening and why she thought it was acceptable to show up unannounced. I was trying to find the words to tell her she needed to leave. She looked at me with that smile and said, in this casual, almost playful tone, "So, how has life been without me?" The way she said it wasn't like she was genuinely asking how I'd been doing. There was this underlying assumption in her voice, this expectation that my life had fallen apart without her, that I'd been sitting around miserable and alone, counting down the days until she might come back. She said it like she already knew the answer, like she was just allowing me to admit how much I'd missed her and how empty my life had been. I felt anger bubbling up in my chest. I opened my mouth to respond, to tell her that she had no right to be here and that she needed to get out of my house immediately, but I didn't get the chance to say any of it. I heard footsteps in the hallway leading to the bedrooms, and so did my ex-wife. We both turned to look, and then Lisa appeared, walking into what had suddenly become the most awkward situation imaginable. Lisa stopped dead in her tracks when she saw my ex-wife standing in the living room. For a few seconds, the three of us just stood there, frozen in place, nobody saying anything. My ex-wife's face underwent a rapid series of changes. First, there was confusion, like she couldn't quite figure out who she was looking at or why someone else was in my house. Then recognition hit, and her eyes went wide as she realized she was looking at her former best friend. Then came the shock, the complete and total disbelief that Lisa was here in my house, clearly comfortable and familiar with the space. My ex-wife's whole body went rigid. Then she managed to find her voice while looking directly at Lisa and said, "What are you doing here?" Her voice was sharp and demanding, like she was a teacher catching a student somewhere they weren't supposed to be. There was genuine disbelief in the way she said it. She couldn't understand why her former best friend would be in her ex-husband's house, casually walking around as if she belonged there. Lisa, to her credit, didn't look nervous, guilty, or caught off guard. She didn't flinch, stammer, or try to explain herself. She just stood there calmly, then walked over to where I was standing, positioned herself right next to me, and said in a clear, steady voice, "I'm in my man's house." She let that sink in for a second, and then she turned the question back around on my ex-wife. "What are you doing here?" My ex-wife's mouth opened and closed like she was trying to say something, but couldn't get the words out. I could literally see her brain trying to process what was happening, try to make sense of this situation that clearly didn't match whatever she'd imagined when she decided to show up at my door. She definitely hadn't pictured this. The silence stretched out again, even heavier than before. After what felt like forever, my ex-wife finally managed to speak. She looked at Lisa with pure venom in her eyes and said one word, "Betrayer." She practically spat the word out, her face twisted up with anger and wounded pride. She said it like it was the worst insult she could think of, like that one word summed up everything she was feeling. Then, without waiting for a response, without saying anything else to either of us, she turned on her heel and headed straight for the door. She yanked it open and walked out, slamming it shut so hard that the whole frame shook, and then she was gone, leaving Lisa and me standing there. After my ex-wife stormed out of my house that Saturday evening, I honestly thought that would be it. I figured she'd go back to whatever life she had going on with the guy she left me for and just leave Lisa and me alone. I mean, she'd made her choice years ago. She'd walked away from our marriage. In my mind, there was nothing left to say or do. But I was completely wrong about that. What happened next caught me off guard in a way I wasn't prepared for. The very next day, I got a call from my ex-wife. I didn't answer the first or second calls, but by the third call that afternoon, I picked up just to tell her to stop. The moment I answered, she launched into this whole speech about Lisa. She told me that Lisa was a horrible person, that she was a backstabber who had betrayed their friendship, and that I needed to open my eyes and see what kind of woman I was getting involved with. She kept saying things like she went after my husband. And what kind of friend does that, as if I were still her husband, as if she had any claim over my life anymore? I tried to cut her off and end the call, but she just kept talking over me, her voice getting louder and more emotional with each sentence. So I ended the call. That phone call was just the beginning. Over the next few days, the calls kept coming. Sometimes it was early in the morning before I left for work, sometimes during my lunch break, and sometimes late at night when I was trying to wind down. When I stopped answering her calls, she switched to text messages. My phone buzzed constantly with long paragraphs about how Lisa had betrayed her, how their friendship meant nothing to her, and how I was being fooled by someone who wasn't who I thought she was. The messages all had the same basic idea, just worded each time differently. She painted this picture of herself as the victim in all of this, as someone whose best friend had stabbed her in the back by getting together with her ex-husband. What she conveniently left out of every single one of these calls and messages was the fact that she had cheated on me and was the one who had destroyed our marriage in the first place. Then she took it a step further. One Tuesday afternoon, I was at work when the receptionist called my desk phone. She told me someone was in the lobby asking for me, and when I asked who, she said it was my ex-wife. My stomach dropped. I couldn't believe she'd actually shown up at my workplace. I excused myself from the task at hand and went down to the lobby, and there she was, standing by the front desk, looking determined. She asked if we could talk privately, and I told her right there in the lobby that we had nothing to talk about. She started in on the same speech about Lisa, about betrayal, about how I deserved to know what kind of person Lisa really was. People were starting to stare, and I could feel my face getting hot with embarrassment and anger. I told her she needed to leave and that if she showed up at my job again, I'd call security. She looked shocked that I wasn't listening to her or taking her side, but she eventually left. I kept telling her the same thing every time she managed to get through to me. I said that what Lisa and I had together was none of her business, that she had given up any right to have an opinion about my life the moment she filed for divorce, and especially when she moved in with another man while we were still legally married. I reminded her that she was the one who wanted out, that she was the one who said she needed to find herself, and that she'd clearly found someone else while she was at it. If I were direct enough, if I made it clear enough that I wasn't interested in hearing what she had to say, she'd finally back off. But she didn't. If anything, she became even more persistent, even more determined to make me see things her way. When my ex-wife realized that I wasn't going to turn against Lisa, that I wasn't going to end my relationship based on her accusations, she changed her approach completely. She stopped trying to convince me directly and started going to others. She called our mutual friends, people we'd known as a couple during our marriage, and told them her version of what had happened. She said that her best friend had stolen her husband, that Lisa had been waiting in the wings the whole time, just looking for an opportunity to move in on me. She made it sound like Lisa and I had been having an affair during our marriage, which was absolutely not true. She told people she'd come to my house to try to have a civil conversation with me, only to be ambushed by the sight of her former best friend there. She left out the part about abandoning our marriage 2 years earlier. Lisa handled all of this so much better than I did. While I was getting worked up every time I heard about another lie my ex-wife had told or another person she'd contacted, Lisa stayed calm. She told me that we knew the truth, that the people who really mattered would believe us, and that my ex-wife's lies would eventually catch up with her. She said that engaging with the drama would only make it worse and give my ex-wife more ammunition to use against us. She reminded me that we hadn't done anything wrong, that we'd started our relationship long after my marriage was over, and that we didn't owe anyone an explanation. I knew she was right, and I tried to follow her advice, but it still bothered me that my ex-wife was playing the victim when she was the one who had cheated and lied. It bothered me that she was trying to ruin Lisa's reputation just because she was angry that I'd moved on. It took about 3 weeks before I finally understood why my ex-wife had shown up at my door that Saturday evening in the first place. The information came to me in pieces from different people, but the bulk of it came from Lisa, who told me that one of her other friends had heard that my ex-wife's relationship had ended. According to Lisa, my ex-wife's relationship with the man she'd left me for had fallen apart completely. Apparently, things had been bad between them for a while. They fought constantly, much worse than she and I ever had. The guy had a temper that my ex-wife hadn't fully seen when they were sneaking around during their affair, and once they were actually living together full-time. His true personality came out. He was controlling about where she went and whom she talked to. He was jealous and accused her of cheating even though she wasn't, and he had a habit of putting her down in front of other people. Lisa said my ex-wife had tried to make it work because she didn't want to admit that she'd made a mistake leaving me, but eventually it got to be too much. They'd had a huge fight about a month before she showed up at my house, and he'd kicked her out of the apartment they were sharing. She'd been staying with her parents since then, which I'm sure was humiliating for her at her age. So there it was. The man she thought was so much better than me had turned out to be a complete disaster. And now she was alone and decided to come back and see if I was still available. She'd assumed that I'd be so happy to see her that I'd take her back without question. The nerve of it was almost unbelievable. The assumption behind that thinking made me angry all over again. It showed that she'd never really respected me, never really valued what we had, and never really understood that her actions had consequences. But at the same time, learning all of this made me feel grateful. I was thankful that I'd learned to value myself enough not to be someone's backup plan or second choice. If my ex-wife had come back a year earlier, when I was still healing and still struggling with the loneliness, I might have been tempted to listen to her. I might have been desperate enough to consider giving her another chance. But by the time she showed up at my door, I was in a completely different place. I was happy. I was with someone who genuinely cared about me. And I had no interest in going backward. My ex-wife didn't give up easily, though. When I blocked her main number, she started calling from different numbers. I'd answer, thinking it was a work call or something important, only to find it was her on the other end. She left voicemails that went from sweet and apologetic to frustrated and demanding. The emotional whiplash of her messages showed me exactly why our marriage had been so difficult. She'd always been like this, swinging from one extreme emotion to another, and I'd spent years trying to keep up with her moods and make her happy. Now, from the outside of it, I could see how draining that had been. This went on for another 2 weeks. The next time she called from a new number and I accidentally answered, I didn't let her get past her first sentence. I told her clearly and firmly that she needed to stop contacting me. I said that I had moved on with my life, that I was happy, and that she needed to respect my decision and leave me alone. She immediately started arguing, saying I wasn't being fair and that I wasn't giving her a chance to explain. I cut her off before she could get going. I told her that I'd given her every chance to save our marriage when it actually mattered, back when we were still together, and she'd chosen to throw it all away. I said I wasn't interested in being her safety net now that her other relationship had failed, nor in being her backup. I told her directly not to contact me again, then ended the call before she could respond. After I hung up, I immediately blocked that number too. Then I called a few of our mutual friends and told them directly that I didn't want any information about my ex-wife passed along to me, and I didn't want them to pass any information about me to her. I made it clear that, as far as I was concerned, that chapter of my life was closed entirely, and I wanted to keep it that way. Sitting there after that final call, it felt like I was finally closing a door that should have been shut years ago. I have no idea what happened to my ex-wife after that final phone call, and honestly, I don't care. I don't wonder if she's doing okay, I don't think about whether she found someone else, and I don't worry about what she might be saying about me to other people. She's not my problem anymore. If I could go back and talk to the version of myself who was sitting in that lawyer's office 3 years ago, devastated and convinced his life was over, I'd tell him that it gets better. I'd say to him that the pain he's feeling is real and valid, but it's not permanent. I'd tell him that the woman he's fighting so hard to keep isn't the one he's supposed to be with, and that someone better is coming, someone who will show him what he deserves. I'd tell him to stop blaming himself for the marriage falling apart, to stop wondering what he could have done differently, because the truth is that his ex-wife made her choices, and those choices had nothing to do with his worth as a person or as a partner. And I'd tell him that one day he'll be grateful for all of it, even the parts that hurt the most. If there's one thing I want people to take away from my story, it's this. Don't settle for someone who treats you like an option or a backup plan. Don't stay with someone who lies to you, cheats on you, or makes you feel like you're not good enough. And don't be afraid to move on and find happiness with someone new, even if other people don't understand or approve. Life's too short to waste on people who don't value you. And there's too much potential for genuine happiness out there to settle for someone who only wants you when their other choices don't work out.